and welcome to another episode of Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. We're back with another innovator interview, and this time we're going to be talking about solar power, which of course is a keystone to the post-carbon economy, which is the goal we need to achieve as soon as possible to halt the CO2 emissions that are raising the planet's temperature. Fossil fuel-generated electricity is responsible for much of the increased occurrence of drought and extreme weather. It also leads to rising sea levels, which are going to inundate a lot of coastal cities over the course of the next century. But the tide could turn. The International Energy Agency reported that as of 2020, solar is the cheapest source of electricity available in the world. And floating solar panels enjoy advantages over land-based solar farms because the water itself cools the system, which makes them more efficient. Our guest today is Mike-Marsch. He's the head of solar development at Blue Wave, a Boston-based certified B Corporation dedicated to, and I quote, revolutionizing energy with simple, powerful solutions. They aim to work with landowners, with landlords, with individuals and communities to build new solutions to generating solar power. But solar power faces challenges from those communities that are concerned about local views, about floating solar, ruining vacation destinations along coasts, all sorts of things. And we have to overcome those objections to find a way to have a frank talk about the benefits and urgency that make floating solar an important feature of our future energy landscape. You can learn more about Blue Wave if you want to follow along in this conversation at Blue Wave, that's all one word, bluewave.energy, not your normal.com, bluewave.energy. Welcome to the show, Mike. How are you today?
Thanks so much, Mitch. I'm great. How are you?
Doing well. I understand you're all hunkering down for a snowstorm. I hope it goes well, but here in the West, it's going to be a sunny day.
Yeah, solar won't be generating too much in the Northeast this weekend, but
well, it'll be pretty. And I want to start off by asking you. You've declared this mission to help landowners and communities, investors work together to create solar energy generation capacity, and to achieve regenerative outcomes. Tell us about your progress to date and what led Blue Wave to launch as a B Corp to solve this problem.
So excited to talk about this as an owner in the company and someone who's been here almost from the beginning. We are very much a mission-driven company, so love to talk about the mission. We started 10 years ago to, as you mentioned, revolutionize energy with simple, powerful solutions, and that focus has led us to a few different places over the years. Mm-hmm. So I'll mention community solar, and not sure if that's something listeners are familiar with, so I'll just briefly describe. We've developed a lot of projects where it's a large and centrally located solar project, but we're able to share a lot of the benefits, particularly energy savings, with customers in communities all around the array. So renters, homeowners, folks who can't put solar on their roofs, we're able to share benefits with them. And that's been one of the solutions we've really leaned into over the years. We've also, particularly more recently, the last 5 years or so, focused on agrivoltaics. So that's the combination of a solar project, but also with a really active agricultural use. So we're building some really innovative projects there that I'd love to talk more about. Then, as you mentioned, the floating solar. So those projects are newer to us, newer to the U.S., but it's actually a huge space globally. And I saw a recent report that could be a 4.6 gigawatt market opportunity globally by 2026. So we're really excited about that and bring some of the best practices from abroad back home to the U.S.
How much of humanity's power generations does 4.6 gigawatts represent?
Relative to humanity, it's maybe a small percentage, less than 5, but that's an annual number. So that's represents, from today where it's less than a gigawatt, it represents a lot of growth.
Sure. Now, why a B Corp? This is a benefit corporation. It's designed to have greater accountability and to be more transparent. It seems to be really important to the evolution of these community projects. And our listeners have heard about this on a number of interviews, where people are coming together through a for-profit organization, but one that has decided to make itself a service to the community. Why did you all pick a B Corp structure?
Yeah, when we pursued B Corp certification back in 2016, 17, when we were already, 5-6 years into the business, we really saw it as a natural extension of values that we already held and that we'd already clearly expressed to ourselves. I kind of can't talk about this without mentioning Blue Wave's founder, a gentleman by the name of John DeVillers, who is a very long-time public servant. He was appointed by President Clinton to lead the New England EPA. And John is, the strongest environmental warrior I've ever met. And, those values of using clean energy as not just a way to fight climate, which is of course critical, but also as a local solution for ecological preservation, farmland preservation, economic development, have always been very core to our business. And it's really the why that we all get up and work so hard every day. So a B Corp certification was a really exciting way to just communicate that clearly to the rest of the world.
Let's talk about the value of solar power now. The cost has fallen, and it can be applied in a lot of different places. And I noticed last week that Environment America came out with a new study that showed that if big box retail stores place solar on their roofs, they could generate half of the power they use in the building on an ongoing basis. This is the kind of interesting new placement of generation, this distributed grid that we're starting to evolve, and you all are playing a key role in. You've mentioned a number of different directions you're going, but let's talk particularly about floatovoltaics. Those are panels on water. How does that fit into the energy mix? You mentioned that it could be about 5% globally. How much of the United States' future power should we be thinking about placing on bodies of water?
Yeah, so we see photovoltaics is a really important complement to the energy transition more broadly. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned, or you asked how much generation there could be. The National Renewable-Energy Laboratory recently did a study that put that figure at about 10% of energy production in the U.S. So if all 24,000 of the man-made water bodies in the U.S. were developed with floating solar, which probably not going to get to all 24,000, but could get to a lot of them, you'd actually be generating about 10% of the energy production in the U.S. So there's a real opportunity there. And we see it as very important particularly in land-constrained areas. Mm-hmm. Our company grew up in Massachusetts, which isn't the biggest state in the union. And, there are very real questions from folks in local communities about, if land is all developed as solar, is that the most responsible land use? So while we think there are good answers to the questions about, converting a lot of land or using a lot of land for ground-mounted solar, floating solar is a great way to use, a water surface or kind of land area that is not otherwise being used as an energy source.
That's interesting because it suggests that water utilities could become energy utilities as well. And your site refers to a 155 megawatt project on a reservoir in Massachusetts. Is that an example of rethinking who's involved in the generation of power and the role of the community in solving this problem for its citizens?
I think it is. I would just maybe untangle the 155 megawatts is about what we've developed lifetime as a company. Projects in Massachusetts, floating projects in Massachusetts will likely be smaller than that. They'll probably be in the 1 to 5 megawatt range, just given the size of water bodies that are available. But we still see a real opportunity there. And yeah, I think you're right that some of these water bodies, which are typically man-made reservoirs, for irrigation or for drinking water or for water treatment, are opportunities for the folks who control those, which can be local governments, they can be hydropower companies, to find another way to use their water or their land and be a part of the energy transition.
Let's talk about how photovoltaics works. I mentioned in the introduction that the water cooling the panels makes them more efficient. Does a floating solar system work, for instance, during a winter storm like you all are getting ready for? And does it work when there isn't a lot of snow on the ground, but perhaps the water is frozen?
Sure. So the projects are, just to give everyone kind of a mind's eye image, You build the projects on land, float them onto the water body, which, part of the focus on a man-made water body is it's generally going to be smaller and less prone to storms and big waves. And then you anchor the solar project either to the bank or to the ground, the bottom of the water body. And so they're tested for large wind loads and storms. And, many of these have been installed in places globally that can have serious weather and harsh weather. So while the project will not generate as much energy as it would on a warm, sunny summer day, you will still get energy production. And these are a lot of the same issues that we deal with ground-mounted solar. You get a nor'easter in New England and it's going to cover solar panels on land as well.
Sure. Snow will do that. So it doesn't stop generating in the winter. It's not a power source that you have to replace at certain times of the year. What about on natural bodies of water? Can they also be placed there? And if you do that, does it result in the water heating, and does it have an impact on aquatic plants and animals that are in the pond or in the body of water?
They can be placed on natural water bodies. I've heard of prospective projects in bays and other water bodies that are at least a little calmer than the open ocean, and on lakes. There's not any direct heating of the water body. If anything, actually, the shade cast on the water underneath the solar panels will help keep a water body cooler, which can be a great benefit. And you mentioned you're in the West, in warm places with drought issues, for example, where you have evaporation from open water bodies. The solar project can actually help reduce evaporation and keep a reservoir more full.
Now, let's talk about the NIMBYism, the not in my backyard people who have emerged as a challenge to solar and wind farm placements all over the country. How's the solar industry responding to those concerns that renewable energy generation harms local views or property values? Have you been able to identify data that shows otherwise? And how do you present those costs along with the benefits to the environment to local residents who are concerned about that?
First step is to just engage with the local community. Whenever we have a project, our first step is just go there, be present, meet with folks. We hold a lot of voluntary community meetings, and just really understand the particular site in the context of the community, because folks will have what are often valid concerns about a potential impact, and that can be the view, or that can be changing the character of the local neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And so, we really work to incorporate those concerns into our plan for any project from the beginning. And there are many things you can do. A great thing about solar projects, and particularly floating projects, is that they're pretty easily screened from view. They're not very tall. Unless folks, have a home right in front of a reservoir, which is likely to be a drinking water reservoir or an irrigation reservoir anyway. You can often screen these from view. So we can be responsive to a lot of community concerns that way. There are times when folks just aren't going to agree, and we understand that, but we do feel that the benefits, particularly when we're able to do, for example, these farming or these floating projects where you're able to leave, use the water, the land in a really productive way in addition to the solar, that the benefits really outweigh any costs.
Do you find that when you go into communities and you have this dialogue, that people come around to this, or is this a really sort of an endemic problem?
I think there's always an initial reaction where folks, just change is surprising and folks need to come to grips. But 9 times out of 10, we find that we're able to provide solutions, and folks ultimately get on board with the vision, and we're able to respond to their concerns. There are folks who may never get there, but that's definitely the minority.
Well, and that's the human experience. Some of us are just going to disagree, and we have to learn to get along together. Now, you've also have a concentration in regenerative farming partnerships where you combine solar with humane and sustainable farming practices. Tell us how that's evolved, and what does that kind of an installation look like?
So excited to talk about that as well. So, going back to, I mentioned John DeVillers. John was leaning on me as the head of development as long ago as probably 9 years to start finding ways to really incorporate this active agricultural use in our project. So, that can be anything from, building a kind of conventional solar project and just having sheep grazing it and making sure that the plantings that we do are pollinator friendly so that we're a net benefit to the local ecology, on up through, the projects that we've done recently where we just, with our partners, cut the ribbon on a project up in Maine that we built over existing blueberry fields. So they're 100-year-old blueberry cultivars. And the blueberries have survived and thrived through the construction process. And there's a farmer signed up to farm them for the next 20 plus years. And so, that's an example of taking something that was already a great kind of agricultural asset and community asset and just combining it with clean energy. And we're really excited about that. And I'd also mention, we're working on several projects, but there's one that's just finished construction in Massachusetts where we're doing active grazing of cattle. We're doing crop trials. We partnered with University of Massachusetts Clean Energy Extension, and through them, obtained a grant for research with the Federal Department of Energy to study how crops perform under these different types of solar arrays and under different conditions. So, we see a huge opportunity here. If you back out and look at, if the solar industry grows in the way that folks are expecting it to, you're talking about 5 million plus acres that could go into a solar land use in the next few decades. So, getting that right and building projects like this that are creating not just local clean energy, but, local food, local jobs. And I mentioned community solar. We can be sharing energy savings in the local community. We think that's really exciting.
So let me ask you to visually describe what you just discussed. And would you imagine banks of solar panels and sheep and cattle in the same field?
Yep.
Or is it sort of scattered around in order to give the animals more space? And then I have another question when we get done with that.
Yeah, from a design standpoint, the projects are generally a little higher so that you can get farming equipment in and out.
Okay.
Or got cattle that they're not going to rub against the low edge of the solar panels and potentially damage the solar panels. But you can also build projects as long as the rows of panels are spaced out enough where you can get farm equipment in and out and otherwise access the land area under the panels and even between the rows of panels. It looks a lot like a conventional solar array.
So the other thing that occurred to me as you described the blueberry fields is, we're also seeing reports that we will have transparent solar panels that, for instance, could be used as windows in buildings. They allow light through, but they also generate energy from part of the solar power passing through the glass. Could we have solar panels over crops in the future? Transparent solar panels?
We have crops over solar panels now, and that is a big part of what we've been working on. Is we actually built a software tool 5+ years ago now, where we really got deep in the weeds of how understanding how much light gets through between the cracks of a solar panel or through a specific type of solar panel. As you mentioned, there are panels now that are more transparent called Bifacial solar panels. And as the sun moves during the day and through different seasons, understanding how much light, direct or diffuse light is getting down to the ground level. And what we found is you create a new type of habitat that might not otherwise exist or would exist maybe in a greenhouse. And that can actually be very beneficial for growing certain types of crops. So while it's not the same as an open field, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's an opportunity. And actually, I heard your episode with the company that had the vertical farming, the kind of vending machine style vertical farming, and thought a lot of those same principles apply here, where you're creating a new type of environment and can actually do new types of agricultural production.
So almost like a new form of greenhouse, but in a way open to nature instead of closed off, and yet exploiting the available solar capacity in that space. That's really fascinating.
Exactly.
Now, what we've been talking about describes a very different grid than the one we have today, where generation is concentrated, for instance, at large dams or at a fossil fuel burning power plant or a nuclear facility, although obviously we don't have very many of those now. How do you imagine the grid changing, and particularly when you think about the distributed community solar projects that fit into all of this near where power is consumed, in addition to all those traditionally isolated generation capacity plants? How much do we have to change the grid, and what do you all foresee that's going to cost, as well as the benefits of making that transition?
You're absolutely right that it is a big change. So the grid we have now was really built around two key concepts. One is centralized power production, to your point. So big power plants in particular locations, and then for one-way power flow. Right. And what we're doing now is building a grid or building energy assets that need a grid that can handle two-way power flow and distributed generation. And so that is a big change. And the other thing I mentioned is it's a little deeper in the technical weeds, but the way power flows are managed on the grid has relied on some technology to manage voltage that was more centralized. But what we're moving to is a grid that will be managed by the inverters at the local at each of these distributed generating plants. So it's a really big technical challenge, and it's a really big change. But I would say that the investment needed to make it happen is deploying a lot of technology that already exists and that just needs to be refined and scaled. It is not coming up with something totally novel. It's a matter of embracing tools that we already have.
So it's an iterative process, starting from the infrastructure we have and moving to one in which power generation is more distributed, and keeping the grid in balance, which is what I understand is really the biggest challenge, is no longer dependent on 1, 2, or 3 sources of power, but potentially thousands.
Exactly.
It also suggests that our participation as citizens in that process, by putting solar on our roof or having a wind turbine in the backyard too, or on the roof, would potentially drive transformation locally that starts this migration to a new reality. How does Blue Wave work with individuals, or do you work with individuals at this point to think about their place and their investment in the grid?
Another great question. So we very much see the role of distributed generation projects like ours as an economic development opportunity. And that economic development opportunity can't just be in communities that are already very well off. Yeah. So unfortunately, so far, the way the solar industry has developed is really focused on sharing the benefits with folks who are already in a pretty strong socioeconomic position, and that's generally been because the financing of projects relies on good credit and folks who have high FICO scores being customers of projects and things like that. So we see this opportunity to keep building projects like the ones we're building now, but making sure that they're reaching and sharing the benefits with individuals in low to moderate income communities. For example, that could be community solar, as we've been doing now for years, where you're offering somebody the opportunity to sign a contract, no money down. They just are subscribing to a community solar project and saving money on their electric costs, and supporting that local solar project. So I think there's a real opportunity for folks to realize those kind of benefits as individuals.
If I'm sitting at home listening to this, who should I contact in order to begin that conversation? Because I think a lot of folks who are listening would like to be able to tap into community solar.
Yeah, community solar is a local thing. So depending on your state, you can reach out to us. And we have projects in Massachusetts, Maine, New York, and soon to be other places like Rhode Island and New Jersey. If we're not there, I would just Google community solar and your state and see if there is an opportunity for you to get involved.
Great. Well, how can folks keep up with what's going on at Blue Wave?
I think you mentioned the bluewave.energy. That is the best place for the latest and greatest.
Fantastic. Well, I hope everybody will go and sign up for your newsletter and keep track of what you're doing. I want to thank you very much, Mike, for joining us today.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
We have been talking with Mike Marsch. He's the head of solar development at Blue Wave. They're based in Boston, and of course, they're a certified B Corporation. So look to them as an example of a good, transparent energy provider. Think about what you can ask for in your own community when you start to investigate community solar. This and all of our podcasts are designed, hopefully, to help you think about how you can get involved in changing the human impact on our global environment. It starts with small steps, and it starts with making changes in our personal habits, but also rethinking how we source all of the things that we get in our life. Electricity being the most important. We're on the verge of a transition from one form of energy to another. It's something that humanity has not done for more than 150 years when we embraced petroleum. And unfortunately, look what happened with that. We have a chance to get it right this time, people. Let's do it. This is Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear. We'll be back with another innovator interview soon. But in the meantime, I hope that you will take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let us all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.